Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome back to another Genshin Impact animation analysis. Today we have To the Stars Shining in the Depths. I wanted to make sure I got that title right, so I just glanced over here. This is another one that was requested by my composer tier member, Unlimited Blade. He just throws in something once a month, and due to his status on my Patreon, that goes straight to the top of the list of things I get to. So this is this one. He knows I've listened to the music for this already in a separate video, but he was like, I want to hear what your actual opinions are and views are on the animation, so here we are. And without further ado, let's go. All right. I did not expect that to be the opening.
The fortress of Meripede may seem like a prison, but it should in fact be regarded as a gathering place for exiles. I will arrange false charges against you so that you may investigate inside the fortress.
The truth is, this place has a lot of hidden rules.
All of our informants, including the ones that had infiltrated the guards, suddenly vanished.
Something bad will happen during lunch on the third day.
So this is more like...
A bottle of crimson liquid?
This is like in-game animations.
You know those pipes that make strange sounds? Don't ever go near them at night.
I knew it was a trailer, but I kind of thought it would be kind of more of like a cinematic thing, but this is just a gameplay trailer. Weirdly enough, I don't think I've actually seen much of the gameplay animation for Genshin, so...
This could get a little chilly.
There's some cool stuff in here, though.
Negotiations have broken down. Please leave, ladies and gentlemen.
If Wriothesley does have a plan, what could it be?
After being away from the sunlight for so long, even the terrifying depths of the sea start to feel like home.
I have to...
That was
Have we
sus.
entered into the next stage of the prophecy?
I don't like the way he said that.
And now, another catastrophe will soon be upon us. I mourn this turn of events.
It's gonna sound really stupid, but I'm not familiar enough with Genshin's characters to put two and two together to realize that that was the Oratrice Mécanique d'Analyse Cardinal guy. That's... I just put that together. I knew I recognized that voice.
I cannot fully understand myself.
I'm confident that we'll find the meaning of our existence one day.
Rumors saying that you were born from calamity. You inherently bring danger to those around you.
Why should we trust this species from who knows where anyway? Melazines can't be trusted! That goes for Nervalette too!
There's only one thought on my mind. Only through bloodshed can their debt be repaid.
Wriothesley! Where did you take my siblings?
Even if the truth may not be pleasant.
Since they have no way to dispose of the leftover remains, they have ways to transform.
This is going to be kind of a unique analysis for me.
Forever.
It beggars belief just how carefree you have been. From the very beginning, you, the god Focalor, have failed to take action.
I'm focusing on
What are you trying to do?
much different things than a cinematic would have me do.
What justice means to you? Answer me, Nervalette!
You will see much in the human world, from the delightful to the depressing. And one day,
True.
when you have dwelt among humanity long enough, you will be placed to bring judgment over all as a spokesperson for Fontaine's past.
Fontaine's what?
It is unnecessary to hold me in such high regard.
How many times do you think they had to re-record that line to get that accent on the T just right? Okay. All right, so I skipped that little spot at the end. I would usually be like, hey, let's get to the next section, but it was just like a gameplay featurette thing at the end. So I wanted to focus on some specific spots in this because, like I said during the reaction, this is a little bit different from what I usually focus on with cinematic stuff. There's like a notably distinct focus on animation that's done for in-game movement that's easier to render out in that function and through the rendering engines of the actual gameplay engine, rather than something that is pre-rendered and has a lot of visual fluff to it, a lot more spit and polish to make it look really nice and specific at certain points. So this will be a different discussion than usual. So for those who are used to seeing my more cinematic breakdowns, you might be interested in what I have to say different compared to what I would say for a cinematic trailer, because this is going to be a different beast all the same. Animation is a huge, wide, broad basin of what that visual medium can contain and how you handle something in a game engine compared to a fully rendered high-end cinematic. It's just a different beast. So without further ado, let's talk about some of those things and why I think that some of these are really clever and really cool, especially inside a game like this. The first thing here is this use of chromatic aberration. I'm not sure if this is done exactly in-game. It feels like it is due to how it separates and how it's focused. It could have been done in post just to make things edit together a little nicer, but with how the camera goes through, I feel like this might be part of a cutscene in-game. But right down here, you can see this separation of these colors, and that's a very interesting spot because it doesn't really seem to happen in many other places. Like over here, there's a little bit of it, and that could also be the process of just having the lack of focus over in that corner, since the focus is on the character and you have a focal length on the camera that would be focusing on the character. That f-stop would not be wide enough to get the detail off on the sides, so it would be a little bit more blurry. It's that bokeh effect if you're familiar with photography terminology. But in general, the fact that it's happening over there, it doesn't really change, but this one appears while the camera is coming in. So I feel like it probably is some sort of a vertigo effect with the camera, which I've talked about, that like zooming the camera in while you're pulling the camera back, and like that parallaxing effect gets really obscurative around the subject while it's zooming in. Like this, you kind of have this separation of the background and the character, and in this case it's actually kind of a reverse vertigo where the character is getting more focused, the background's kind of getting closer. It's just making everything feel much more condensed and claustrophobic in the moment, and that's something you can do in an in-game engine. That's not one of those things I was mentioning earlier where I was like, how do they do that? But it's just kind of neat to include those sorts of things in games in general. That's just a general thought. I like that games are starting to be a lot more creative with their use of cinematography, and that's just a thing that's been the case in more recent, like this past decade or so. They've been really focusing on that. Before that, it was much less focused on, and stuff like this transition makes me think, okay, this has to be like an in-game transitional thing, but it's blending two different scenes. Like, that's where I'm sitting here like, I can't tell if this was custom made for this trailer or not. This is the one I was like, are they doing this in-game, or is this like a rendered mix? Because this transition through the eye into a different scene of the character and having this sort of like fisheye effect around the side of the vignette, it's just kind of pulling everything together and making it feel just a little bit more distorted as you come into focus and follow the eyes up to the next spot. This is good cinematography. This is really clever, and I really do wonder if this is in-game or not. So people, tell me down below if this actually happens in the game, if somebody's played this and knows. Otherwise, I am got to assume that that's just really good editing, or even a blend of really good editing and a custom-made asset of him sitting on the floor. Maybe that was a custom render, because getting that close to the eye would not be something that's feasible in like a game camera, with the ability to then obscure it into a different scene like they did with that transition of the eye color. That is very, I can't think of a way that that would look good, I suppose, is what I'm trying to get at. So I think that that must have been done with the full flexibility of the character model. So it must have been done in game or a custom asset made for this trailer. I just don't know which it would be. So just to gush about how I find the way that game animators really like fine tune the animation for the engine to be able to handle it, it's just really cool. I'm just going to be going through this frame by frame while I talk about it, but these particulates around are very fine tuned. Like they're picked apart to be able to figure out how much the engine can handle while still looking cool. That in itself is an art. You can have so many more particles around, flying around. You have that dust. All that stuff is difficult to render if you're not careful with it. And being able to pick exclusively the amount you need, especially within the realm of like quality options in the game for people who are playing on less capable systems, you have to know exactly how much you can get away with at ultra and then scale that back as you go. So it's like, I know that a lot of that is automated as well these days, but it's really cool to see the level of attention to like which particles, how much do we want to emit around these effects, how many glows, how many of these like sweeping, all these are assets that you need to be able to utilize in the animation, but like how far is too far, how little is too little. You have to find this really, really, really small window of sweet spots in order to not overdo it with the assets. I'm sure a lot of them are pre-rendered as well. Like a lot of those, like these spikes, for example, in here are probably basically just image files that are way lower resolution, way easier to hide, especially when it's behind a giant glow like this. Stuff like that is definitely easier to handle, but then they like disappear like this, and that's just a really clever way to like hide what they are. If they are lower quality, it's easier to mask all of that, especially in a sequence that looks to be locked in for the camera angles. Like you can't choose to see it from a different angle, so that frees up some animation room as well. You're just able to do a lot more if you know exactly where the camera is going to be, whereas when you're doing stuff just wandering around like completely free camera usage, that is much more difficult to be able to decide how far you can go because you have to keep it looking good at every angle. Whereas when you lock down the camera for these, you're able to fudge those corners a little bit, make some cheats, and like make things just work a little bit more efficiently for the animators and make sequences like this looks so much more cool. You know, you get that cool factor when you have something like this. That's why those special moves have that in them and why they're like a separate camera instance. You don't want to overdo it, but you want to have it cool enough that you can do these sorts of things, this huge vortex going on around the character. Like all those are lower resolution, as I'm sure you can see. These are all like 2D textures just kind of appearing and disappearing as needed. That's a lot easier to render in, especially when you know the camera isn't going to be getting too close to them and looking too shoddy. So that's just, that's cool. I love game animation in its own way. It has such limitations to it at many times, but then when you're able to just unleash like this and have these really cool cinematic attacks, it makes everything so much more worth dealing with all those restrictions around. It makes it so much more worth dealing all those restrictions around earlier. So these moments, I'm sure, are where the animators are like, ooh, yeah, I'm on the A team. Another side thing I wanted to talk about when I get in here, because I'm seeing the character model here, the one he's attacking. Just keep an eye on him and his face right here, because you can totally tell that it's just the model. There's no expressions. He just like me when my bank account, like he's just got this dead eye look, and that's just because you don't need to have the characters that are getting pummeled really show any emotion, especially when you're this far away and you know they're going to be berated by more and more assets. They're going to be covered up by so much. You're going to be looking at the cool main character beating the ever-loving hell out of him. You're not going to be looking at his sad, depressed, my wife left me looking eyes. So it totally works out. And those are the type of corners I'm talking about, where you know that a character is not going to be utilized in the same way, so you put all the focus on the other one and basically let the opposition ragdoll. If you don't need them to be fighting back, don't even do anything to them. Just let them go A-pose and get their shit rocked. Like, that's all you gotta do. For this one, I already talked about a lot of what I was gonna say for this one with that prior special move segment I had, so I'm not gonna get too deep into it, but wanted to point out more of this, because like I had said in the last one, a lot of these, like, 2D assets, these lightning bolts, I mean, even a lot of this, like, rock shrapnel seems to be 2D. There's not much 3D asset here. Maybe these gigantic rocks, you know, like the large chunks, but the smaller stuff and the stuff getting like layered in the background, the stuff on the ground itself, is all just asset work. It's all flat 2D assets, and it's minimizing the effect on the engine because, again, you don't want to render too much all at once. It'll make games laggy and what have you. So this is just another really beautiful example, by the way, even down to like having this stuff on the ground. Like, it looks like the ground is broken, but it's truly just like painted. It's just 2D. There's no depth to it, actually. They're just feigning depth by adding these little ridges and such and making it look like the ground was cracked open. It wasn't, and that's so cool. There's so many things, like I said earlier, that you can do with game animation, specifically in-game, that you wouldn't have to worry about in a 3D cinematic or just an animation cinematic in general, because you can just draw it, you can just render that, and it won't have that much of an effect. I mean, there's still allocation issues for things to not be taking days, weeks, months to render, but not nearly as tight as it takes for a live render in a game engine. So there's just it's a different monster. Like I said, there's so many rules and restrictions you have to follow compared to the other. And it's so cool seeing where those land and what the animators do to make that happen. It is just an entirely separate skill in and of itself to be able to do this well and keep the game up and running, like I had also mentioned earlier. And this is the last one I want to talk about regarding all of that. This is really neat in and of itself because it gives me the example of having an entirely separate room in order to be the really visually fantastical piece that this sequence is. Like, this entire shot is almost definitely handled in its own separate, like, space in the game. So, like, you'd be in an area somewhere else, and then it would basically teleport or clone the character model to a completely separate part way out there, and therefore much less to render because all the other assets would have been culled out at that distance. And this is its own space. So you can do these extra details and have all this extra, like, especially with this like liquid, which I assume is water, just kind of flying through here, and you're able to do all that and all these general effects happening here. You can have all these wisps, all this like cloudiness in the background here, all the water, all this lens flare action happening here, all the physics with his outfit. All of this can happen at full bore, 100%, because you don't have to worry about all those assets from the area you just were at. So either this loads into an entirely new chunk of the game data, or it just throws you way out into the distance to a separate section way out there, so it's not affected by all that, and it just looks great. It looks so good. And these are the types of things when you're making games that the people who are creating all of that have to keep in mind. Like, where can certain things happen? Where can we allow certain details to take place and certain effects to be used that won't crash the game, won't make it really laggy and unplayable and just a terrible experience? Knowing how to allocate all that is very important. I've said that like 4 or 5 times now in this video, and it's just because it's true. It's one of the most unsung detail works in the entirety of the game dev space, is allocating for different asset management. It is so cool to know where things are done and how things are done in its own right, and this just looks fantastic as a result because you don't have to worry about any of that. It's all just happening here. Some of this does look like pre-made asset stuff, like some of these like particle effects in here might just be 2D assets that were rendered and put in, but a lot of this looks to be interacting with his body and all the physics around here. The animation on his fingers is extremely finite, and there's a lot of that like light going through them. Just it's hitting his hand and going through it, so you know it's happening in game. So it's really neat to see all that. And that's most of what I wanted to talk about in this video, and through all this is that detail, that effort, and that work. It is so so hard to do, and I hold that in high regard. But yeah, I think that's about all I had to say. I know this was definitely a different type of animation analysis from my usual ones, purely due to the content, and I did not expect that. I thought it was going to be a cinematic piece, not an in-game. So that's, I think, one of my first in-game engine breakdowns that I've been able to do. As I've said a few times now, it's just a different monster, and it's really cool to be able to decipher what those reasonings are and what the devs are thinking about and what the artists behind it have to consider while making that happen. There's always considerations in animation. There's always corners you have to cut in order to get things to work, and always things to keep track of so you don't overstep those boundaries. And this was just a really nice way to be able to show some of those. Unfortunately, it is kind of one of those things where I'll talk about this type of thing like once, and I'm not going to be able to talk about it much again because it'll be the exact same subject every single time, because I'm not focusing so much on the animations themselves as I am the techniques in order to make those actually work and function properly. So it's just a different discussion, but it is nice to be able to do that and talk about once in a while, pull back the curtain and show people what the devs have to go through in order to make this sort of game work. It's just, it's cool. I love being able to explain that type of stuff to people. And if you're the type of person who liked watching me explain all that, you'll probably like all of my other animation analysis stuff if you haven't seen it, even if they are a slightly different beast when I talk about them. I'm sure you'll still like the detail work that goes into those, so if you want to see all those, there's playlists for it, so you can find them and watch them at your leisure. And if you like this video and you want to see another animation analysis of something, by all means drop it down in the comments below and I will do my best. I'm still trying to get back in the saddle for the Honkai Impact stuff. There's just been a lot of stuff in my personal life happening, so it's hard to keep track of when I can get to those because they do take a little bit longer to record. And then there's ones like this that happen and I have to get to them earlier, so I do, and then it pushes those back a little further. But I digress. If you liked this video and you want to follow me for more in the future, you know how to do all that, and I will see you all in the next video. Goodbye!